If you've ever been frustrated trying to paint flowers with acrylics, I get it. I have been there too. I used to paint flowers that looked like this. Now they look like this. So in today's video, I'm sharing my top 5 acrylic flower painting techniques to help your petals go from flat to full of life. If we haven't met before, my name is Marianne and I'm a professional artist and educator. I've been painting flowers in acrylic for over a decade. I absolutely love to teach painting on my channel, and I've written a free ebook just for acrylic painters, so be sure to download that if you want to learn my full process. But that's enough about me. Let's get started on our top 5 techniques for painting realistic flowers in acrylic. Number 1 is to think in layers. When I first started, I was surprised by how my first layer always looked streaky and dark. The paint dried quickly, leaving no time to blend, and since I'm self-taught, I assumed that one layer paint was the final painting, so I must have been doing something wrong. But in reality, acrylics need multiple layers to build dimension for 2 reasons. First, acrylic paint dries by evaporation and often appears slightly darker once dry. The acrylic binder is milky when wet, but becomes clear as it dries, which can make the wet paint look lighter than the final color. This means your first layer often looks different than what you initially expected. Second, the pigments in acrylic paint vary in opacity, which is how well a color covers what's underneath. Titanium white, burnt umber, and cadmium pigments are typically opaque, while pigments such as quinacridones and ultramarine blue are more transparent. What this means is that our first layer will probably be slightly on the dark side and have visible brush strokes, especially if you're using more transparent colors. Rather than feeling frustrated, we can anticipate this and think of our first layer not as the final painting, but as a foundation. Most flowers I paint have 2 or 3 layers. If my flower has a dark background, I usually add in some burnt umber as my first layer, knowing full well it'll get covered. This adds warmth and opacity. Then when I layer my background colors on top, having those 2 layers working together gets rid of the streaks and the inconsistent brush strokes. When we do the same with the actual painting of the flowers themselves, my goal for that first layer is to cover the canvas as quickly as possible without worrying too much about blending. This is called blocking in, and it provides a solid foundation for the subsequent layers that creates that rich, luminous color. This first layer works just like the burnt umber, where it's just there to build opacity and dimension and support following layers, which is where you actually get the realism, not in the first shot. So that streaky, unattractive first layer isn't a mistake, and no, you didn't ruin your painting. What you're seeing is just the nature of acrylic paint, and we can lighten, soften, and build more color depth with each layer. Technique number 2 is to use a split primary palette for maximum saturation. One of the reasons I love painting flowers is their vibrant, bright colors. Now, if your mixes are turning out muddy, it usually means an adjustment is needed, either in your color choices or how you're combining them on your palette. If you've taken any of my painting courses, you'll know that I love the versatility of a split primary palette. I typically only ever use 8 colors, but those 8 colors can mix almost any color I need. So what is a split primary palette? You've probably heard that red, yellow, and blue are considered to be the primary colors. Now, modern printers use magenta, yellow, and cyan instead, but for the sake of this video, let's just stick with red, yellow, blue. As painters, we have to understand color theory and how the colors work together, but we also have to pay attention to how each pigment behaves in real life, how it mixes, covers, and lasts on the canvas. Let's talk about choosing your colors. Pigments lean either warm or cool depending on their undertones. For example, cadmium red medium is warmer with a yellow undertone, while quinacridone magenta is cooler with a bluish bias. So a split primary palette uses 2 reds, 2 yellows, and 2 blues, with each of those primaries leaning either warm or cool. I also personally include burnt umber and titanium white on my palette, bringing my total to 8 colors. This gives me a full range of color while maintaining vibrancy and avoiding muddiness, simply by knowing which primaries to combine. For example, in my iris painting, I used quinacridone magenta for cooler, vibrant purples, and cadmium red medium for warmer, slightly muddier purples. I also used different reds in my peony painting, and you can see the cool magentas in the top outer petals and the warm cadmium reds in the hotter orangey petals. There's so much more to explore when it comes to color theory and painting flowers. So if you'd like to dive deeper, I would love to work with you in my online courses, which are Painting Flowers in Acrylic and Color Mixing with Acrylic. Both are pre-recorded so you can learn at your own pace. In Painting Flowers, we'll paint these soft, beautiful peonies with bonus lessons on this iris. In color mixing, you'll build your own 26-page color guidebook that you can use for years to come. I've also added in hours of bonus materials into both courses, and you can bundle the two together for some extra savings. You can learn more through the links below, and I can't wait to see you inside. Technique number 3 is to focus on your values. If your flowers seem flat, it usually means that your painting is missing a full range of values. Value is how light or dark a color is and creates form and dimension in your piece, helping your petals appear three-dimensional. As an example, even without color, a black and white photo clearly shows values that range from highlights to shadows, which is what makes it look real. A simple exercise that they often have beginner artists do is drawing a circle and then adding highlights and shadows to turn that flat 2D circle into a 3D sphere. This exercise illustrates how value can take something flat and make it dimensional, and that same principle applies to painting flowers. To use value in painting, pay attention to the inherent lightness or darkness of the colors in your palette. Looking at my split primary palette, when I'm painting, I often arrange the colors by the hue first, going from red to blue and ending with burnt umber and white. Rearranging these same colors by the value shows that the yellows are naturally the lightest, reds are in the middle, and blues are the darkest. Let's turn this video black and white for a moment so you can better see how it works. If you want to keep your flowers colorful while maintaining a full range of values, use colors with naturally darker values for shadows and lighter colors for highlights. Now, I personally do not use black in my palette, and instead I mix ultramarine blue and burnt umber for rich shadows, which keeps my painting feeling colorful instead of heavy. I also use naturally dark mixes and blends like maroons, navies, or browns in the shadows. For highlights, I use tints with warm or cool undertones depending on the lighting. Combining rich shadows with pale highlights creates that full range of value and makes the subject pop from the canvas. Technique number 4 is to use soft edges for soft petals. Now, I personally paint in both acrylic and oil, and one of the benefits of this is that I can take lessons I learned from oil and apply them to acrylic. With oil, it is easy to get those soft blended edges because the paint dries slowly. Acrylics dry much faster, and so our edges often appear hard or sharp, which can make your subject look stiff or flat. Even if your reference photo has sharp lines, remember this: a painting is not a photograph, and we are not trying to copy the photo exactly. The human eye perceives objects much more softly than cameras, and we notice general forms and values rather than every edge. Good paintings usually combine hard and soft edges. Hard edges draw the attention, while soft edges create atmosphere and depth. This lets you control what part of the painting the viewer focuses on, rather than having all of the petals competing for attention. So how do you create soft edges with acrylics when they dry so quickly? The solution is layering. What you're going to do is wait until your first layer is dry to create that solid base of color. Then pre-mix your colors in advance and leave a different brush in each color. That way you can switch between different brushes as opposed to worrying about using the same brush with multiple colors. This allows you to blend the two colors wet on wet and switch rapidly between them so you can soften as needed. Another effective technique is dry brushing. Gently scuff a thin layer of paint over an edge to soften it. This lets the colors underneath show through, creating a misty, delicate effect without having to remix wet paint. Using both layering and dry brushing helps your petals appear soft and natural, making your flowers feel more airy and lifelike. Now for the last technique, which I think is a bit of a game changer. Technique number 5 is to use warm and cool colors to create depth. This tip ties together many of the concepts we've discussed so far and can help you create airy, delicate petals full of dimension. But first, let's look at a color wheel. Colors on the wheel are typically split in half and divided into warm and cool colors. Warm colors include your reds, oranges, and yellows, while cool colors are your greens, blues, and purples. As discussed earlier, when you're working with a split primary palette, you also have warm and cool undertones within each color, regardless of what side of the wheel it falls on. So you can have a cool leaning red or a warm leaning blue. Now I know this feels a little complicated, so for this technique, I'm keeping things simple by focusing on the basic warm-cool distinction. So whatever side of the wheel the color falls on. One challenge when painting petals is showing gentle ripples and texture while still keeping them feeling light and airy. Contrasting warm and cool colors is a great way to do this. Contrast in painting isn't just light versus dark. By shifting between warm and cool temperatures, you can create the illusion of depth even in pale petals without adding strong shadows. Let's look at this dahlia painting as an example. Here, cool blue highlights sit on the tips of the petal right next to warm reds and peaches. This suggests cool lighting and creates texture while still keeping the petals light and airy. The warm-cool contrast creates the perception of form and depth, and you can see how it looks on the painting itself when complete. Using this technique allows your petals to remain fluttery and soft and builds in texture without having to resort to bright highlights or dark shadows. If you enjoyed this video, I have an entire playlist of flower painting tutorials I'd love if you checked out. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to write me a comment. Don't forget to grab your free ebook and happy painting!